If I wanted to, I could make this vlog all about Donald Trump. He does so many stupid things and says so many ridiculous, absurd, batshit crazy things that if I wanted to, I could do an entry every day on Donald Trump. I choose not to because there are many other important things in the world that need to be discussed. However, when I woke up this morning and I was going through my newsfeed and I saw what Donald Trump had to say about Greenland, I'm just like saying, what the heck is going on? I mean, you talked about Joe Biden maybe having mental issues and having dementia. I'm sorry, but look in the mirror, guy, because the more I hear you talk, the more insane and unconnected with reality you sound. So when I woke up this morning, I first I read it and then I looked for the quote, and yes, he did say it. So he said, quote, but the fact that they had a boat land there 500 years ago doesn't mean that they own the land. And I'm like, first I'm going, duh. Has he ever heard of the Mayflower? A boat landed at Plymouth Rock, and then the English started claiming the land. It's pretty much how it went. When you had the Spaniards land a boat in the islands of the Caribbean, that's kind of how it all started. And it wasn't just 500 years ago, it was more than 1,000 years ago. His statements show an abject ignorance of both history and international law. Now, under international law, if you have a piece of land that apparently is not being administered, there's actually two tests. Now, granted, this does not apply today. This applies under traditional pre 20th century international law. So, what are the two primary requirements? One, the land must be terra nullius, also known as res nullius, meaning that no other state has sovereignty over that land. And the second is effective occupation. Does the state in question exercise sovereignty? Do they establish governmental institutes? Do they establish actual, peaceful, and continuous administration of the place? Those are the two tests. If a state meets those tests, again, under customary traditional international law, not under international law in 2026, okay, or throughout the 20th century for that matter, doesn't apply. But 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, most certainly applied. That's how European states gained sovereignty over North and South America. It was through those legal mechanisms. Now, you might say, well, what about the natives? Unfortunately, since they didn't have recognized state entities, their opinions were not taken into account. Okay. Is that something that we can lament? Sure. But can we change that that was the fact, that that was how they practiced international law in that era? No, we can't change that. So that's actually an interesting topic if you ever study or read into intertemporal international law. But that's not what we're here to do today. So the history is the international law is simple. The history is a little bit more complex. So I think most Americans know because this is in our textbooks from I remember from elementary school that the Vikings, the Norse, established settlements in Greenland more than 1,000 years ago. Okay? This is not something that is controversial. Okay? This is something that is well established. It's been in our textbooks for decades, if not longer. So we know that the Norse were there, and they had been there for over 1,000 years. There was an interregnum in there. Okay, so in 1261, the Norse settlements in Greenland recognized the overlordship of Norway. Okay? So Norway was regarded as the sovereign, at least over the Norse settlements, and that dates back to 1261. Shortly after that, in 1380, shortly by historical standards, in 1380, Denmark and Norway formed a personal union. Okay? Now, that might sound strange, yeah, but you had the Kingdom of Denmark and you had the Kingdom of Norway, and the two kingdoms were united under a single king. In theory, the two kingdoms still existed. So the king of Denmark was also the king of Norway, but he was sovereign over both. And it was considered as a single state. Now, in 1450, the Norse settlements in Greenland disappeared. Why that's the case is still the conjecture of historians. One is the potential devaluation of the trade routes from the Norse states to Greenland, the lower value of the ivory on the walrus, as you had more African elephant ivory entering the market, and even the potential of global cooling at the time. You had the Little Ice Age. Any of those, and perhaps all of those, were factors. Not really relevant, but still an interesting discussion nonetheless. So, what happened after that? Well, there was about almost 300 years of basically no European contact in Greenland. You also, by the way, had very limited Inuit presence as well. The Inuit really were not widespread on the island of Greenland yet. So, in 1721, okay, Han Øgede, I don't know how to say the name, I don't speak Norwegian or Danish, but he established a permanent mission and a permanent trading post in 1721. And keep in mind, this is still decades before the United States Declaration of Independence and its actual effective independence. In 1775, Denmark officially declared Greenland a colony. This was a year before the US declared independence and 8 years before the United States formally had independence. From this time, Denmark established government offices, trading posts, ports, forts, and other infrastructure, okay, leading to the development of Greenland. Was Greenland part of any state before that? No, so it was res nullius, terra nullius. And they were building up the structures of state administration. So there they very, very clearly meet the test, okay, for effective occupation and for res nullius to claim sovereignty over the island. Now, what about the Danish-Norwegian personal union? That was still in place into the 19th century. At the end of the Napoleonic Wars, that came to an end, however. In the Treaty of Kiel, Norway was ceded to Sweden. So Norway became Swedish territory. Yeah. But in the Treaty of Kiel, it specifically excluded the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and importantly for our discussion here, Greenland. So Greenland was still under Danish possession. So Norway was ceded to Sweden. Norway then gained its independence from Sweden in 1905. In 1919, Norway's foreign minister, and this is actually a very important case. This is actually leads to one of the landmark cases in the history of 20th century judicial decisions in terms of the development of international law in this area. So, Norwegian Foreign Minister Niels Claus Ilhen, he stated on behalf of the Norwegian state that Norway recognizes Danish sovereignty over Greenland. And that became important because there was a case before the Permanent Court of International Justice, the precursor of the ICJ. This was the judicial organ of the League of Nations. And so, in this landmark case in 1933, called The Legal Status of Eastern Greenland, and the court established that Danish administrative acts, including legislation, including trade, including scientific experiments, among others, were acts that confirmed Danish sovereignty over the entire island. So international law made it very, very clear that Greenland was Danish territory. Now, what about the United States and Greenland? Well, in the early parts of World War II, okay, Germany occupied Denmark. Denmark really, there was nothing Denmark could do. Denmark was a small state, and Germany was basically a juggernaut at this point. So Denmark was under Danish occupation. The Danish ambassador in the United States worked with the United States for the United States to have access to Greenland to put bases there in furtherance of the war effort and to secure the island. After the war, the United States saw the importance of Greenland in terms of its security vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. And so in 1951, the United States and Denmark, within the NATO, the building NATO framework, okay, that would be developed through the 50s, throughout the rest of the Cold War, established bases, okay, through defense agreements and mutual cooperation. There were about 50 US bases in Greenland at the height of the Cold War. By the choice of the United States, there is now only a single US base in Greenland. But the United States has access to Greenland. Denmark has never denied access to Greenland for the United States. Denmark has actually been a loyal and faithful partner of the United States for more than a century. There was absolutely no reason for Donald Trump to say and do the things that he has. We already have access to Greenland with Denmark's blessing. Denmark has cooperated with the United States for a century in security matters, dating all the way back to the sale of the Danish Virgin Islands to the United States. Denmark has been a faithful partner. Donald Trump has thrown that away. All he had to do was talk to the Danes. The Danes would have worked together with us because Denmark has the same concerns about Russia that the United States does, and deep down they also understand that China is a concern as well. The Danes are actually very astute. In the conversations I've had with Danish people, I've always been impressed with how well knowledgeable the Danes are about the situation in the world, far more than the vast majority of Americans. They understand what is at stake. They understand that their own security is also at stake. And because of that, they have been willing and faithful partners of the United States. All that was required, Donald Trump, was to negotiate with the Danes, and they would have been more than willing to allow the United States to have access to Greenland to secure its and US and European security. Because I agree in that a presence in Greenland is necessary, especially with the melting of the Arctic due to climate change and the growing, more expansive claims of Russia in the Arctic Ocean. And there's also an increasing Chinese presence there as well. The Europeans know that, the Danes certainly know that, as do the Greenlanders. They're all very cognizant of these things. And so, Donald Trump, just talk. Don't threaten. Don't badger. Don't make stupid claims like landing a boat there 500 years ago doesn't give you sovereignty. Denmark has sovereignty over the island. And in fact, the island has significant self-administrative rights. They have significant autonomy. Denmark has even said when Greenland wants to go its own way, they have Denmark's blessing. Copenhagen has given Greenland its blessing. Now, do Greenlanders want to join the United States? No. Small number, sure, you can always find a small number, but the vast majority of Greenlanders do not want to join the United States. Are they prepared for outright independence yet? Probably not. But all indications are that they are moving in that direction. Greenland and Denmark have a cooperative relationship. It's based on mutual respect. Donald Trump is not about mutual respect. Donald Trump is about badgering, and Donald Trump is about control.